Hello and welcome. My name is Franco Velasquez, and I'll be your host and your presenter today on the intelligence layer from HostBreach with AI and red team insights. So, $39.4 million, that's the number and climbing that has already been paid in DOJ settlements, not for having vulnerabilities, but for the gap that exists between what defense contractors claim about their security posture and what validation actually proved, sometimes external validation. So these settlements, they weren't necessarily triggered by breaches alone. They were triggered when the scrutiny revealed that security claims didn't match reality. So every number that I'll show you today comes from verified DOJ releases, court documents, CISA advisories, and more. What you're about to see is a pattern that's already happened to major contractors, and it's about to accelerate across the entire DIB as CMMC enforcement begins. Now, the coming wave of enforcement for CMMC, this isn't just a one-time isolated event. This is actually what's coming down the pike, with CMMC rolling out to more than 300,000 contractors and the DOJ Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative ramping up. We're about to see this pattern repeat at scale. So you see on the screen, we have 5 steps here, right? And this is what we foresee happening in the future. Everybody at the moment is rushing to get CMMC level 2 certified, but neither the government contractors or the RPO or CMMC consultants helping to implement these security controls are bringing up one thing, which is, am I actually secure from an adversary who's scanning my organization? Is the CUI that I'm supposed to protect actually secure from an outsider's perspective? And so the pattern that's going to happen, because nobody's bringing this up, right, is that we're going to start to see external vulnerabilities be exploited, and uh, and then from there, it's going to trigger reporting requirements, right? You're supposed to report after 72 hours of a breach, and then that could bring unwanted scrutiny, right? DIBCAC involvement, all these things. And the question will be, does your security match your claims? As they investigate, this could then turn into the gap between what you claim and the reality, equating to a liability. So that's what's costing a lot of these companies these $39.4 million is the gap, right, between what is actually real versus what they claim, right? So again, we'll talk about these steps very briefly. When an adversary goes after your organization, and now with AI and the Claude AI report that came out recently with vibe hacking and all this, it's very clear. Adversaries and folks who were not even so skilled, but now with the help of AI can scan at mass scanning and exploitation. This is very real. You're going to be scanned. The adversary is going to look for things like exposed systems, credentials in the dark web, misconfigured services, anything that's outside, visibly from the outside, that can be weaponized. They will consider that to be a vulnerability that they can weaponize and exploit. So that exploitation, it becomes inevitable. It's not a matter of when or if, it's a matter of when. Sorry. Now, again, that reporting dilemma. Did you report within the 72 hours? Did you completely disclose everything? And again, that unwanted scrutiny that's going to come if you're an easy target, right? That unwanted scrutiny. And then the compliance gap, which could potentially lead to a settlement. Now, I'll start off here in this next slide with a quote from Bailey Bickley, the NSA chief of DIB Defense, saying, "When we engage with small companies in the defense industrial base, they often think that what they do is not important enough to be targeted by China. But when you have the significant resources like that to conduct mass scanning and mass exploitation, there is no company and no target too small." Again, we know for a fact the adversaries are scanning a lot more, right? With AI, scanning and performing that reconnaissance against your organization has only become easier. And we know that the DIB is made up of a lot of small businesses, right? And none of those small businesses are exempt from state actors. Now, how do we tie this back to the intelligence layer from HostBreach? Well, we transform your technical findings into executive narratives that drive action, that tell a story. We're not presenting CVSS scores, CVEs. We need something to bring context, right? And allow the leadership to understand risk. So we'll see here in the screen an illustrative example. We find a CVE detected on the web server that's external. And the AI narrative is something like this. Your public-facing timesheet application runs log4j, which APT groups are actively scanning for this exact version. And the attack could happen in, let's say, a couple of minutes. In this case, just to catch our attention, 60 seconds. It got in 60 seconds. Good movie. And here's how the attack could go down eventually, leading to the CUI exfiltration, right? So, so we'll move on. Now, Hudson Rock. This is another big thing. Hudson Rock, they specialize in information stealer malware, right? So they track all of this. And there's a report that came out where they published and they clearly outlined how many defense contractors have these leaked credentials on the dark web. Not just that, but also VPN access. They're selling these things on the dark web for as little as $10, right? So the speed at which these credentials are now weaponized, we're talking days here, right? So it's not like a credentials out there and it's just hanging out there for a long time. No, once it makes it out to the market, they become weaponized within days of theft. Now, the scale, again, we're talking thousands of defense contractors' credentials exposed through information stealer malware. And just so you know, information stealer malware, it does exactly what it sounds like. It could steal session cookies, all the passwords, a bunch of things that are on your, think of it as spyware on your endpoint that's been compromised. Now, uh, it's been explained to me in this way, so I'll explain it in this way to you. What happens with information stealer malware is you have bad guy number one. Bad guy number one is the adversary who is not really interested in holding your company at ransom. They're not interested in blackmailing you. They're not really interested in your organization and causing you harm in a way. What they're after is scanning at, at scale, finding an easy target, and finding a way into your network. And then they sell that access to bad guy number two. And bad guy number two, those are the folks, the adversaries, who are actually very interested in holding your ransom. They're very interested in monetizing and weaponizing this access that has been sold to them. And this is where this information stealer and credential theft is uh, very important. And this is where it kind of fits into what we're seeing out here. So that's a big issue. in the DIB. Now, right before we get into this slide, just know that every stolen credential is a potential incident waiting to happen. And when it does, remember that's when that scrutiny begins. So now we'll talk about this other uh, case here. You probably heard about it in the previous years about Aerojet. Now, to be clear here, Aerojet, they claimed 10 controls were compliant, and external auditors came in and they found that only 5 controls were actually implemented, right? And so the court documents showed that there's no adequate explanation for this gap. Say, hey, why did you report 10 as being compliant, but you only have 5? What's the deal, right? And it's not like this $9 million settlement was for having vulnerabilities, because every organization has a vulnerability here and there at some point, right? But it was for claiming again that the security that they claimed didn't actually exist, right? So, and there's another thing we'll talk about. There's also breach where these breaches caused huge quantities of data to leave the contractor's network. And Aerojet apparently failed to report these in a timely manner, right? So the courts were very interested in those allegations. And another thing that the court took into consideration, which I thought was very interesting in this case, was this DFARS adequate security standard, right? So what happened was that the Aerojet contractor, they had a cybersecurity director who essentially was a whistleblower, and he refused to sign compliance documents stating that they were secure and that they were meeting this DFARS adequate security requirement. Because think about it, put yourself in his shoes, right? He brings in external auditors and they conduct a pen test where they were able to get into the environment to total network compromise in 4 hours. All user accounts and passwords were obtained, right? I mean, attorney client documents, security cameras, they got access to all of that. I mean, everything. And ask yourself, if a penetration test can achieve total compromise in 4 hours, would a jury, would a teaming partner, would a prime, would a government agency, would anybody, for that matter, consider that adequate security? I think the answer is obvious, right? No. So again, putting yourself in this cybersecurity director's shoes, right? He's being asked to sign for papers that say that the organization is meeting that DFARS requirement of adequate security. But at the same time, he just learned that his organization was compromised in 4 hours. The speed of compromise is something that's very important in this case, right? To show that there is absolutely no adequate security here because you were just compromised so fast, right? And this is why this external validation matters, because your SSP might say you're secure, but if somebody can come in and own your network before lunch, your security isn't adequate, period. So hopefully that has sparked a curiosity on you. Uh, and I have the jury test down here. Would they consider this accurate security? Would they consider your clients? Would they consider your network to be adequately secure? Right? If we look at your organization and your attack surface, what story is it telling? And how fast do we think that we can compromise that? So with the intelligence layer, you know your reality before anybody else does. Because we look at your organization like an adversary. So you actually know your security posture versus what you've claimed. You can see the same sort of vulnerabilities an adversary will exploit. And you can obviously fix those before they lead to breaches, or like in this case, an incident where huge quantities of data was leaving the network, and ensure your security claim matches reality. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into this next case here, but it's about external exposures again. And there's a CISA advisory tied to this APT campaign against against a DIB contractor, unknown. We don't know who the contractor was. But the point is that this is very real. You can go ahead and research this CISA advisory. It's not from too long ago, a couple of years ago. And notice that this is a real threat. The adversaries are compromising defense contractors. They're going after you. And the dwell time is usually months. Dwell time is, when I say this, I'm telling you that these APT, these threat actors, they're staying inside of the networks for months before they're actually, you know, uh, caught, you can say, or be spotted, right? So how does the intelligence layer powered by AI red team scenarios work in a real world example? So we turn this technical finding into an executive narrative to bring context. So using an actual client finding, we notice 28. So when we look at station, we scan that looks for many things: information stealer malware, vulnerabilities. We also look at FPDS and your contract obligations. And we look for exposed credentials on the dark web, subdomains, and your email security status, and more. In this case, we found 4 exposed credentials. We found 1 subdomain that was of particular interest to us. And then we run this AI red team scenario that's going to be delivered to your leadership, right? Without running a full pen test, we just need to know the story that your attack surface is saying. And here's how the initial access could go down against your actual tech stack, in this case, Office 365. And here we go. This is how your email security comes into play. But regardless, we've identified some roles in your organization who we think may deal with CUI, and they would be of interest to us. Oh, and by the way, here's a subnet that we want to target, and then lateral movement, and then collection, exfiltration of that CUI. So once we run through this whole red team scenario, we put together a CUI exfiltration likelihood percentage, which we think that based on our analysis, it would be pretty high, 75% successful likelihood of getting that CUI out of your network. All right, so I hope you can see here now how we're not just presenting, again, some CVE or some generic things. We're actually painting a story for your leadership and for your teams to go back and fix, remediate. Again, we have another OSINT reconnaissance. We've seen this play out in the supply chain, where again they're looking to map your tech stack. They want to identify key personnel, discover exposed systems, gain that initial access, and then pivot to your trusted relationships, right? So that they're not just compromising your network, then they go ahead and compromise other networks. Now, the investment protection math is pretty simple. I mean, look at these numbers carefully. You're investing easily hundreds of $1,000s in CMMC compliance. Even if you do it, I don't know, if you do it really cheap, you know, we're still talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for the first couple of years. Uh, for some of you, this could easily be multi-million dollars. But if your external reality doesn't match your claims, if you're breached so easily, if so fast, I mean, this brings us additional and unwanted scrutiny during investigations, and you're really risking settlements that are 10 to 20 times that amount of your initial investment. So I've always said, ever since CMMC started to get rolled out, that you need this intelligence and and red team insights to know how an adversary would go about getting to you, to know what the attacker's game plan would be against you, because you really want to protect the investment that you're making, and you really want to protect yourself from the liability that a breach and the additional scrutiny can bring to your organization. You want to protect yourself from that liability. And our intelligence layer costs less than 50K annually to ensure that your reality matches your claims. That's not a cost. It's like an insurance against multi-million dollar settlements, right? So you have maybe three options here. You can hope external exposures don't trigger incidents. You can be reactive and wait for DIBCAC investigations and respond. Or you can have an intelligence enhanced proactive reconnaissance to identify and fix exposures. I don't know, but it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Again, supply chain vulnerabilities. We look at the FPDS contract just like a contractor, just like a adversary who's going after a contractor would do. Are you an easy target? Maybe your joint venture is an easy target, right? Now, our external intelligence provides evidence support for 9 CMMC control areas for level 2, and for level 3, we support 2 controls. And if you have any questions about this, we have additional documentation to support this. Email authentication is a huge problem. We know this across the board, not specific to CMMC or the government space. It's one of the uh, best ways for an adversary to gain access, initial access into your environment, and the losses are huge. But still, within the DIB, I still come across a lot of contractors who lack SPF or things like that that can create these exploitable gaps, really. And you're really making yourself an easy fishing target when you don't have these things in place. Now, the consequences, we've already seen them, right? Uh, we've already seen the DOJ go ahead, and the whistleblowers. We've seen all of these things. Uh, so I don't think we need to harp too much on this slide. So we know already the consequences of not being compliant or saying you're compliant and really not, right? So what we're trying to go after here and making sure that we understand is that uh, right now everybody's still rushing. Everybody is just getting certified, but you really now need to think about how you can ensure that you're not an easy target, that you have resilience, that you're resilient to an adversary attack, because you don't want that additional scrutiny. You don't want your security posture to be questioned, right? And you want to show that you've done everything possible to ensure that you have that adequate security. So our intel layer helps you to see what the auditors, DIBCAC, and adversaries see before they do. And again, with the AI red team simulations, with a supply chain discovery, the supporting documentation, we ensure your claims can withstand external validation. So before the intelligence layer, your leadership may be saying things like, we believe we're compliant with the requirements. And then after the intelligence layer, they can say something like, we have evidence of our external security posture, and we have addressed and identified exposures before they could even be exploited, right? You can be more confident. So the leadership conversation will change. So our deliverables here, we quantify your risk, and we've put that into a GovCon trust score. We run the AI red team scenarios based on your attack surface and what we find using OSINT. And what we provide to you is actionable. So this is for RPO partners, for GRC platforms, and also for defense contractors who wish to incorporate this into their overall compliance journey. So the hard truth is that when scrutiny arrives through an incident, audit, or whistleblower, you need some sort of evidence that will protect you to show you've done your due diligence, that you've really tried to put this adequate security in place, not just policies, not just paperwork, evidence of actual security that matches your claims. I mean, that DFARS adequate security isn't defined